Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ringside Cinema. I am Money Mike. Today, I'm going to be breaking down the women's division in WWE and what matches we could be looking at for WrestleMania 42. Now, I did do a video about this a little bit a while back last year for the men's, like right after Survivor Series. Now, I may need to redo that video before the Royal Rumble because of what happened with Drew McIntyre winning the championship on SmackDown last week. So look for that video probably before the Royal Rumble. But let's break down the women's division today because right now the women's tag team title scene is probably one of the best it's ever been since they've introduced these titles. You know, the WWE previously just did not really show that much care booking wise for these championships, and now 2026, even later part of 2025, we have all of these main event women in this tag team title scene. And it's like, oh my gosh, like what is WrestleMania going to be like? What are we looking at WrestleMania wise? TLC match? Are we looking at like maybe tag team titles defended inside the Elimination Chamber? You know, we go back to the very first time these titles were crowned. It was inside the Elimination Chamber where Bayley and Sasha won the tag team titles inside the Elimination Chamber. And it's one of those things where maybe that's where we're heading towards this year. But also, when you look at the main event caliber women in the tag team division right now, again, look, the women here on my t-shirt: Rhea Ripley, Iyo Sky, Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, Asuka, Kairi. You have Nia Jax. You have so many women within the tag team title scene. Bayley, you have Lyra Valkyrie, who's on the up and coming when it comes to getting into that main event scene. Meanwhile, you have Stephanie Vaquer, who is the women's world champion on Raw. You have Jade Cargill, the women's champion on SmackDown, and let's not forget Liv Morgan and Roxanne Perez as well, because they are facing Rio at Saturday night's main event for the tag team titles. So Liv Morgan, Rhea Ripley get to reunite their feud from 2 years ago. Yay. So I want to break down every title on the main roster: women's Intercontinental title, the women's United States title, and of course the World Championships as well. So let's go ahead and start off with the Women's United States Championship because they're already teasing kind of what we could expect to see at WrestleMania. So we know Julia is once again the Women's United States Champion. Obviously, she did not really have a good first run. That's more so on creative, not her. But it's one of those things where they teased it last week on SmackDown, where Alexa Bliss was challenging Julia for the Women's United States Championship. And in a backstage segment with Nia and Lash Legend, they kind of mentioned how Charlotte Flair, who was out on SmackDown, Alexa Bliss, without Charlotte being around, is going for a singles title. Already planting the seeds. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be disappointed if they break up Charlotte and Alexa because I really love that pairing, but we know it's coming. And could Alexa Bliss potentially be the one to dethrone Julia? And then Charlotte gets jealous. Maybe Charlotte's the one who turns heel. But it's one of those things where we could be looking at Charlotte versus Alexa for the Women's United States Championship come WrestleMania. And I look at this the very same way where the Women's Intercontinental Championship, which we'll talk about in a minute, where they put Becky Lynch in the Women's Intercontinental title scene to kind of help elevate that championship. And this could be their way of doing the same thing for the Women's United States Championship on SmackDown. So I think if that is the direction you go, you already taken away one tag team from the women's tag team title scene with Charlotte and Alexa, two main eventers. Plus, both of them are also very capable of potentially facing Jade Cargill for the world title on SmackDown. You know, I said in my predictions, I said that it was going to be Bianca versus Jade at WrestleMania. That seems to be the plan. And again, I'll get to that in here in a minute. But I do feel like, to me, if Bianca cannot make it back, that maybe they would pivot Charlotte to the world title scene to face Jade. And maybe that could keep Alexa within the Women's United States title picture while Charlotte's going for the world title. But again, that's all depending on Bianca's injury and if she's going to come back or not. But yeah, again, it does seem like we are already pivoting towards losing one tag team with Alexa going for the United States Championship. That obviously is going to create jealousy within a tag team, as we know in wrestling. So that is going to be interesting to see. But I also think that is going to do wonders for the women's United States title scene, similar to what Becky Lynch did for the women's Intercontinental title scene on Raw. Now let's stay on SmackDown. You have the women's world champion, the women's championship. Jade Cargill. Like I said, I feel like it's Bianca Belair. They're waiting for Bianca's finger to heal. We really have no word on what's going on. It is kind of interesting that she has been out for a whole year with this injury. So it does seem like maybe a lot of plans maybe were on hold. We do know Bianca was special guest referee for Jade and Naomi, and we didn't really see anything take place from a story perspective. So obviously Bianca's still being injured; she can't do anything. But yeah, I think it's interesting that right now you look at the SmackDown Women's Championship picture, and it's like you need Charlotte, you need Alexa, you need these big time main eventers that are all pivoting around the tag team title scene because again you have Jade kind of just messing around with Chelsea, BFAB, Minchin, and it's like she needs bigger fish to deal with when it comes to the world title scene. And obviously, if you're going to pivot Charlotte and Alexa to the U.S. title scene, then obviously the big thing here is they're just waiting for Bianca, and that's kind of what it feels like. Is they're just waiting at the time. Maybe Bianca comes back in the Women's Royal Rumble, but it's one of those things where it just feels like they're just going through the motions until they figure out what's going on with Bianca when she can get cleared. So again, I think it's interesting, from a standpoint, who does Jade face at WrestleMania? To me, it's either Bianca or Charlotte. And let's move over to Monday Night Raw, where the Women's Intercontinental Championship turns 1 year old today, as 1 year ago today, Lyra Valkyria defeated Dakota Kai to become the first ever Women's Intercontinental Champion. And it was a rocky start for the Women's Intercontinental Championship. This past year has been a little bit of on and off when it came to the booking. It was used kind of to facilitate a breakup of a tag team. As you saw at WrestleMania with Lyra, Bailey, and Becky, and that went off into its own thing for the Intercontinental Championship. Becky Lyra had a great feud The match with Bayley, the triple threat, was absolutely phenomenal. And since then, Becky Lynch has been the Intercontinental Champion. Maxine Dupree has been the Intercontinental Champion. And I gotta say, I was really enjoying the Maxine Dupree run. I know she had to lose it because she took time off to go get married. But man, I kind of wish they would have waited to give her the title after she got married so she could have had a longer run with the championship. But it's obviously clear. We look at Becky Lynch. She's once again your women's intercontinental champion. And that's not just me saying it, that's Sports Illustrated saying it. But you know what? Who challenged her for that championship? Because again, I think it's clear it is AJ Lee. I think that's kind of what they're waiting for at this point. It's kind of like Bianca and Jade. They're waiting for Bianca to get cleared, waiting for her injury to heal up, so they can go move forward with Bianca and Jade for WrestleMania. And I think at this point, that's kind of what they're waiting for Becky and AJ. And I think it's going to be very interesting because if you go the route of Becky Lynch, AJ Lee, does AJ Lee win the championship at WrestleMania? Does she win the Intercontinental Championship? Because I think it's clear. Obviously, AJ Lee is going to come back, probably be involved in the Women's Royal Rumble. Maybe AJ Lee eliminates Becky Lynch from the Rumble. We've seen AJ Lee get the upper hand on Becky Lynch his whole entire time, so maybe Becky Lynch eliminates AJ Lee. Maybe we're looking at Chicago. Elimination Chamber. AJ Lee made her return in Chicago last year, so it's kind of fitting that these two would have a match for the Intercontinental Championship in Chicago in Elimination Chamber where this whole thing started. But then that also would mean, what do you do for WrestleMania? Because do you run another match? Because again, when you look at how many main event level women are in the tag team title scene, and how many of those women Becky Lynch can have a great match with at WrestleMania. So it's not just AJ Lee, but you're looking at Asuka, Kairi. Does Rhea and Iyo maybe not have the titles for long? Do we see Rhea and Becky maybe for the Women's Intercontinental title? Iyo Sky maybe going for the Intercontinental title? There's a lot of things on the Raw side with the women where, again, we know Lyra, she lost to Becky at SummerSlam. She can no longer challenge for the Women's Intercontinental Championship, which I think maybe, I don't know. Becky lost to Maxine, so does that mean that clause is no longer in effect? So you could put Lyra back in the Women's Intercontinental Championship scene. You got Bayley in there as well. There's a lot you could do outside of Becky and AJ, and even Becky and AJ, you could have them go on and have their grudge feud at WrestleMania, and that not be for the Intercontinental Championship. Hell, I even said when Becky Lynch dropped the Women's Intercontinental Championship, I thought, how do you keep her away from the women's world title scene longer? Like, right now they're keeping Rhea Ripley away from Stephanie Vaquer, and it's like, okay, how much longer can you do that before these two eventually have to meet for the women's world championship? And so it's a wonder of how long can you keep Becky Lynch away from the women's world championship. And right now, it's maybe you have to pivot. If Stephanie Vaquer's injury is worse than we think and she's not going to heal in time, maybe you go back to All Reliable with Becky Lynch. And you make Becky and AJ for the women's world title, which I'll get into more here in a little bit. But again, it's one of those things where the women's intercontinental title scene feels more like it's a guarantee that it's going to be Becky versus AJ Lee for the title. and it's a matter of whether or not AJ Lee wins it. And then what about the women's world title? Because we know Stephanie Vaquer is injured, kayfabe injured, whatever heck, whatever's going on. And one of the things that I would like to see the WWE do here is if she is going to be out for a long time, let's put the women's world title on the line in the women's Royal Rumble. Let's crown a new women's world champion through the Royal Rumble. We've done this with the WWE Championship on the men's side. 1992 with Ric Flair, 2016 Roman Reigns, and Roman Reigns was a champion. He was forced to defend it and in the Rumble, yada yada yada. We all know how that worked out. And then let's do the same for the women if Stephanie is going to be out for a long time. It would absolutely suck if she is out for a long time. And obviously I don't want her to vacate the title just so we can have the title on the line in the Rumble. But if the injury is serious and maybe the timing doesn't work out right for her to be medically cleared in time, I do think the WWE does have time before the Royal Rumble to figure out, okay, is she going to be healthy? Is she not going to be cleared? When will she be cleared to know, okay, what can we do with this championship, without vacating it? And you have the Royal Rumble coming up in a couple weeks, which I will be live streaming right here on this channel. So go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button today, as I do post weekly wrestling content here on this channel. And I'm currently in the middle of a series where I am rebooking every Royal Rumble ever, and whether or not the WWE got it right or wrong with the winner. And I will be discussing the Women's Royal Rumble coming up here very shortly. But yeah, the Women's Royal Rumble. If Stephanie Vaquer cannot go, if she has to be out for longer than they need to, let's put the Women's World title on the line in the Royal Rumble. Yes, does that shake things up, booking wise, who they intended on to win the Rumble? Sure. But it's at least it adds something to that Rumble match. Plus, it gives us a way to find a new champion before WrestleMania as well. So, to me, does Stephanie go into the Rumble, go into WrestleMania as champion? I'm not really sure. Because you have Raquel Rodriguez sitting there. Maybe you have Raquel win the title from her because she's injured, so it's not like she's gonna lose, clean or anything. So you have the injury there where Stephanie could be the fighting champion, and then Raquel wins, and then potentially Liv Morgan wins the Royal Rumble, and then suddenly Liv and Raquel, maybe they're fighting at WrestleMania for the Women's World title. How long does Rhea and Iyo hold the Women's World title? Because it seems like to me they're really doing everything with Rhea Ripley to keep her away from Stephanie Vaquer. And it's like kind of similar to what they did with Becky Lynch. Remember a couple years ago, Rhea and Becky, they were doing everything with Rhea Ripley except Becky Lynch to keep them away before WrestleMania 40. And that's kind of what they've been doing with Rhea and Stephanie. And it does seem like they've been building and building and building to being the match. But you kind of have Rhea now in the tag team title scene. So it's one of those things where how do you split all these women up, right? Charlotte, Alexa, okay, you can move them into the United States title scene on SmackDown. That's fine. Obviously, you're waiting on Bianca to come back for Jade. If not, maybe you just put Charlotte against Jade at WrestleMania. Obviously, Becky and AJ, they're going to have their feud at WrestleMania. And then the Women's World title is where everything gets culminate. gets kind of that big question mark because you have so many main eventers. Asuka, Rhea, Iyo, Liv Morgan. You could put Roxanne in there. You have Raquel. So many women that could be fighting for this world title at WrestleMania. And so it is very, very compelling to see what they're going to do, what the direction is going to be, because the women's tag team title scene right now is one of the best things on Raw, and you don't want them to take you don't want them to take some of the tag teams away because it's been so fun to watch. These women's tag team matches have been so fun. The stories, the build up to everything we've been seeing on TV has been fun to watch. And you kind of like, man, you kind of don't want them to move them away from the tag team title scene, but you know they're going to have to at some point. So, if Charlotte and Alexa are going to split off on the SmackDown side to go to the US title scene, who splits off on Raw so that one person can go after Stephanie? Or Raquel, or whoever's going to be the champion at that point. Again, I could see being Liv Morgan winning the Rumble. Raquel Rodriguez wins the world title from Stephanie, and we have the Judgment Day implosion again. But on the women's side, where it's potentially Roxanne and Raquel turning on Liv. Do you do Liv versus whoever? Like there's a lot of possibilities. You could go with Asuka. You could go with again Roxanne. You have Bayley, Lyra, who are still kind of around the tag team title scene. You can split them off into singles feuds. They can go for the women's world title. There's a lot of options on the table for the women's division in WWE as we head into WrestleMania 42. I just really hope to see that this will come down to like a TLC match. We did not get the TLC match of WrestleMania last year. We were very disappointed in that. We got it like the week after WrestleMania. But you know what? If we got a women's TLC match for the tag team titles at WrestleMania this year, that would be so fun, so amazing for the women to be able to have that match and have that moment. And again, they could just do a match within inside the Elimination Chamber as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see where all of this is going to take the women's division as we head into WrestleMania season. Obviously, the road to WrestleMania begins at the Royal Rumble. We will have more clarity once we know who wins the Women's Royal Rumble. And again, depending on Stephanie's injury, I'm just saying, WWE, put the Women's World title on the line in the Women's Royal Rumble. Let me know in the comments below, what matches do you want to see for the women at WrestleMania 42? Do you want to see a TLC match? What about Jade versus Bianca? Jade versus Charlotte? Do you want to see Rhea versus Stephanie? Liv versus Raquel? Whatever match you want to see, drop a comment below. Let me know. As always, I've been your host, Money Mike, and you've been watching Ringside Cinema.